thank you everybody for joining our webinar. We're going to jump right into things very quickly here. If you're interested in hearing more about Denison, then please hang on for a few slides at the end of this webinar, or call us or email us. Denison focuses on having an impact on improving the performance of organizations through a focus on organizational culture and leadership, and our work with organizations leverages over 25 years of research on the link between organizational culture and performance. This webinar is focused, of course, on culture and innovation. So why did we choose Apple, and what did we do to prepare for this webinar? We did quite a lot of research, but basically it was focused on public information that's out there about Apple, and we felt we needed to select, an organization that a lot of people knew a lot about, but we wanted to dig deeper. And we read the biography on Steve Jobs. We investigated lots of articles, reviewed data, we reviewed videos of Steve Jobs himself. So, we're excited about this content, and we're interested in feedback along the way. So please submit your questions as we go, and we'll answer some along the way at 3 different points. At the end, we'll respond to any that we didn't cover by email or in another fashion. So look in the bottom right of your screen, and there's a type message here area. So please give us feedback as we go and give us questions along the way. This is our webinar team. I'm Tim Kuppler, Denison president. I've actually only been with Denison the last 6 months, but I was a VP and GM and president of a couple other organizations where I was a customer of Denison, using the Denison solutions very actively as a business leader for over 12 years.
And I'm Lindsey Kotrba. I'm the Director of Research and Development here at Denison, and am proud to say I've been with Denison for the last 6 years.
Hi, I'm iCulture. I'm a new research consultant at Denison Consulting. I've been with the company for 6 months.
When we talk about iCulture, we're obviously focused on innovation, and we're focused on innovation from a couple important perspectives that must exist. The first is the generation and management of ideas. And the second is implementation, where those ideas don't just build up and churn, but they're translated to benefit the organization. So it's the ideas plus the implementation that's key in this webinar and is key for innovation in general, and we'll be looking at that today. And we'll look at that in 3 main parts. In the first section, we'll look at Apple's iCulture, and we'll share some aspects of the vision-driven and inspired culture, but also some less publicized aspects that leverage the team on the idea and implementation fronts. In the second piece, Lindsey will share our research on the link between the organizational culture and innovation to help us understand what exists in effective innovation cultures, some different foundations or inspirations for innovation across many different organizations, not just Apple, and other aspects of the culture that must be present to be effective. We'll then engage you to understand how you think you will drive innovation going forward in your organization, so we can focus the content and time in the third section on you. We'll discuss how you can build your innovation culture and a few key things that should exist to be clear and aligned about driving innovation from an idea and implementation standpoint. Okay, to kick off the first section on Apple's iCulture, we'll look at some feedback from you. We obtained feedback from many of you, either when you registered or in a follow-up email, about the question, how would you describe the innovation culture at Apple in 1 word? And this is what we said. We generated this Wordle based on the frequency of your responses so you could see what stood out. Words like creative, focused, intent, futuristic, dynamic. So we've customized this content based on your feedback. For instance, from a creative standpoint, we'll look at what Steve Jobs said about where creativity comes from. We have a heavy emphasis on focus and the intense aspects of the Apple culture, so we'll spend some time on those types of things, but we'll also review some other aspects that also help them become the most innovative company in the world. And again, it was the idea and their approach to implementation that that's making their innovation culture so special. We're going to start by looking at Apple's vision, and for many people, it's difficult to separate Apple's vision from Steve Jobs' vision. So that's why there's some concern about Apple's future after Steve. One thing that was interesting to me was that the essence of Steve Jobs' vision had many different key dimensions. Early in the history of Apple, he talked about a computer in the hands of everyday people. But that expanded over Apple's history to be a tremendous array of products and an incredible product focus. It's been that focus on products that was key, and Jobs pointed to the change to more of a financial focus when he was away from Apple years ago as being a key to their downfall. John Sculley, who ran the company after Jobs was ousted, said in 1987 that Jobs wanted Apple to be a wonderful consumer products company, and that was a crazy plan. That sounds like a crazy statement now after Jobs returned to Apple and shifted the focus back to the product. Jobs said it was the products, not the profits, that was his motivation. It's also the type of focus that's been key. And you highlighted that as we saw the word focus so strongly in your feedback. End-to-end solutions that integrated hardware, software, and the operating system were key. The creation of iProducts that are intended to highlight them being seamlessly integrated with the Internet. Focus on a few core products that over many years led to this incredible array of products. Those were all key. Jobs once said, deciding what not to do was as important as deciding what to do. And we'll talk more about his relentless focus on what they would decide to do that was also incredible. So where did all those great ideas come from? Creativity was another key word many of you highlighted. Jobs talked about creativity occurring with a feel for the humanities and the sciences. He referred to a focus on people at the intersection of art and technology. He used this picture in the launch of some of Apple's most well-known products. A hallmark of Apple's product focus and creativity is simplicity. The focus on end-to-end solutions, along with the ability to integrate hardware and software in one system, allowed them to impose simplicity that continues forward. This New York Times article is well known by many, where they talk about how even a 2-year-old could use their products. And you may have seen some of the videos on YouTube where children are using Apple products. They focused on simple and elegant designs. Jobs was quoted in Newsweek as saying, "We make progress by eliminating things, by removing the superfluous." They were able to make the computer the digital hub so all the devices that connect to it could be simpler. That focus on simplicities has helped us all in so many ways, like their focus on being no more than 3 clicks away from any song or function on the original iTunes. And it's made things beautiful. Tim Cook, in the Jobs biography, said that Jobs believed that thin was beautiful. And then Apple created the thinnest notebook, the thinnest smartphone, and then they made the iPad thin and then thinner again. Many aspects of Apple's product focus and mission as an organization were so clear and consistently supported that they could create change with incredible speed. Think about the iPad advertisement and how that change has revolutionized the music industry. They've really leveraged their approach to creativity and end-to-end solutions again and again, whether it's the Macintosh, iPad, iPhone, or other products. Every change wasn't completely different because of the clear vision that existed. Apple committed to managing a few key changes with incredible focus as an organization. Now, Apple's iCulture clearly has made customers happy, including some of you on this webinar, but focusing on the customer and what they wanted was not the foundation of Apple's innovation culture. There are countless stories about Apple's lack of customer focus in some regards, and some are more legendary than others, whether it's my own experience going in an Apple store last week and leaving, quite honestly, a little bit frustrated, or your own experiences. And when we were preparing this webinar, we were sensitive to making sure we didn't come across like everything's beautiful and perfect at Apple. Because I'm sure when you talk to the employees, there are things that definitely need to be improved, probably some very big things. A legendary customer response is this email response from Steve Jobs. He would answer some emails himself, and this is a really interesting example where his answer of just avoid holding it that way about what became a huge and well-publicized antenna reception issue can be contrasted with how an organization like Ritz-Carlton or others might respond to customer feedback and needs or wants. Jobs actually had to return from a vacation to come back and respond to this crisis. That lack of focus on customer feedback was present from an innovation perspective. Jobs said, we don't do focus groups. And he also once said, did Alexander Graham Bell do any market research before he invented the telephone? Apple has been able to satisfy the needs and desires of customers at a deeper level and without asking them. Jobs said, a lot of times people don't know what they want until you show it to them. They have focused on creating products that they personally love as leaders and as employees, and the iPod was a great example. He also referred to this famous quote from Henry Ford, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. Apple's been able to look into the future, leapfrog the competition, and create new products and user experiences that go far beyond how people look at current products. One great example that hit home for me was when they were harshly criticized for not including CD burners on the iMac. They could have just listened to customers and added CD burners, but they really leapfrogged the competition in an amazing way with the 99-cent songs, the iTunes, and the transformation of the music industry, where Jobs personally met with all kinds of music executives and musicians to drive that change forward. The vision about the future was so strong and well executed with incredible attention to detail and to the dismay of many critics. There was this original Business Week article where they said Apple stores won't work in 2001, right after Apple made the store announcement. And this is the picture of that first store. 10 years later, 320 stores, 1 billion visitors. Talk about an impact on retail with having the top sales per square foot of any organization. In the U.S., they're nearly double Tiffany and triple Coach, who are number 2 and 3 in the U.S. Now again, to try and bring some balance to this presentation, we felt we had to talk about some failures. Look at the products in the top half of this page. Do you know what they are? Do you remember them? Now, cultures develop and evolve over time, and that's the same with Apple as an organization. They've learned from both successes and failures. Organizational learning is extremely important to help move the culture based on feedback, whether that's from customers, employees, performance results, or another area. Apple had some big failures over the years, whether it was the Newton. Do you remember the G4 Cube? What about the iPod Hi-Fi? Mobile Me. It's translated to be the iCloud that we hear about now. No, we think about the iPhone, the iPad, the iMacs of today, the iPod. Do we think about John Scully from the past? No, we think about Tim Cook of the future. They obviously had many great successes, and they've refined their approach and leveraged outstanding product concepts, marketing, simple design features, and other things over and over again while they developed a more balanced culture. This picture is of the original iPod Dream Team. And one aspect of the culture that we don't talk a lot about is teamwork. And they had an incredible focus on teamwork and a focus on deep collaboration as teams that obviously contributed to the ideas and implementation that drove their innovation. And it's not a trade-off when it comes to involving people, but a balance of a very strong and clear vision with well-targeted supporting ideas and work on implementation as teams. One thing we looked at when developing this webinar was reviewing Steve Jobs' videos on YouTube. And I suggest you take a look at those if you haven't, because he talks about the tremendous focus on teamwork with the top team that filtered down to be tremendous teamwork throughout the organization. In the Steve Jobs biography, the author talked about hiring employees that were creative, wickedly smart, and slightly rebellious. They had such talent and a group of A players. Their overall team is distinguished by one person being in charge of major areas like iPhone hardware to worldwide marketing and ops. They're great at dividing up supporting work on a small number of priorities, monitoring status, trusting people to come through on their parts of the priority, and then bringing things back together to make sure collaboration crosses all teams. Jobs talked about what he did all day long in those YouTube videos. He said he meets with teams of people all day long, nearly every day. He focused on the details almost obsessively and expected perfection or, at a minimum, excellence. He talked about part of his responsibility was to be a yardstick for quality and that some people weren't used to in an environment where excellence is expected. And that came from the Jobs biography. So how did Apple build and develop the organization of 63,000 people as a team and how to support and deliver their product vision? A couple approaches were key. The top 100 events were not just their top 100 executives, like at some companies, but it was described in his biography as the people you would bring if you could take only 100 people with you on a lifeboat to your next company. Jobs would end each event at a whiteboard where he would ask, what are the 10 things we should be doing next? He would cross off the ones he considered dumb and then say, we can do only 3. Do you think that had an impact on how those 100 people led their teams? That story came from the Jobs biography. Another story from the biography. Apple University was started with the development of case studies analyzing important business decisions. Apple executives shared these case studies so that Apple's style of decision-making would be embedded in their culture. It was great to see that, being a culture company, and seeing those words as key. Another key characteristic of Apple's innovation culture that's a little less publicized, like teamwork, is consistency. And it obviously went far beyond Jobs' signature black turtleneck. The details of this consistency that supported their product focus really caused me to reflect on my own leadership more than any other factor we saw in reviewing Apple's culture. So how does Apple coordinate and integrate all this work to keep aligned and focused? It started by staying focused on a few product priorities in a relentless way. Jobs would go out to lunch with the design head, Jonathan Ives, nearly every day, and then return to the design studio to review products, to provide feedback, and to get a sense for products across the whole company. Nearly every day he was healthy. The leadership team met every Monday for 3 hours. These meetings were focused on the future, about what each product should do next. There were marketing meetings every Wednesday and countless product meetings. Teams were consistently engaged to deal with problems, issues, and challenges, like when the iPhone team developed the swipe-to-open solution that was far more elegant than the on-off switch. Jobs hated on-off switches, but he didn't develop the swipe-to-open feature. So we've covered many aspects of Apple's innovation culture. And to sum it up, from a mission perspective, engaging people in work like the top 100, teaching decision-making style like in Apple University, and finally, from a consistency standpoint, how daily and weekly routines further supported the other aspects of their culture with a relentless emphasis on perfection. So we're going to take a break at this moment and take some questions from you. Ia's here and looking at the feedback you've given. So Ia?
So far we've gotten a couple of questions. One question from P. Daly was, how pivotal was the time when Apple grew in prominence and performance? Another question from Christopher Druitt is, out of the 63,000 Apple employees, how many are really innovative? I think these two questions are very interesting. My answer to the first question was time probably plays a role in Apple's innovation and their high performance, but it is a little difficult. It's tricky to exactly pinpoint how much time played a role in their innovation and performance. So maybe we can do some additional research in this area and then we can share.
I mean, what was clear, and I think you get this feel by reading the biography, was, how Steve Jobs himself learned over time. And, just using an example that's not an Apple example, it's a Pixar example about how, as time went on and after he went through the Pixar experience where he was able to not be as controlling and was allowing that team to do more of the work, my guess is, when he came back, that did influence his life the second time around, and he does talk about that in the biography. So, time as far as the organization is key, as well as the organizational learning that was taking place along the way, and the G4 experience, the Newton, and all of that. And as they learn from each of those failures, I think now is a different Apple than then. As far as how many of the 63,000 Apple employees are really innovative, that's a darn good question.
That is a very interesting question. One thing we can tell you at this point is we look at innovation at the company level, at the organization level. Maybe not every single Apple employee can be considered innovative, but the company overall, they were able to innovate based on the creativity, skills, and talent and knowledge of these employees. So it's not the individual employee's innovativeness, it's the company's innovation ability, capability.
And just to give a few examples, there's this overriding picture that, Jobs was the innovator. And, Tim Cook said in the biography he didn't give a rat's ass about that and the perception about Jobs doing everything. They're very focused on getting the job done. On the other hand, Jonathan Ive, he shared how, it really kind of tore him up a little bit that there was this perception that when Jobs went on sick leave, that all the innovation was Steve Jobs, and it really frustrated him. So there's these different perspectives in Apple where it frustrates some who are incredibly creative and others who just add and contribute to teams all day long and are excited about the performance results.
Okay, I think one more question from Ross. Will you somehow tie this webinar to the Denison culture model?
Wow, thank you for setting us up here. So those 4 areas are the 4 areas of the Denison model. And again, all of the research that we've been doing focused on organizational culture has been tied into these key areas. And at this point, I'll hand things over to Lindsey for the second piece of our webinar.
Thank you, Tim. Apple truly does have an amazing story, and what comes through really clearly is the impact of the vision and how that's shaped their work and innovation. In the Denison model of organizational culture, having a clear and compelling vision is one key part of an effective organizational culture and is captured within the mission quadrant of the model. Successful organizations are able to operationalize this vision into high-priority strategies and goals that provide direction and shape day-to-day work. The adaptability area of the Denison model focuses on the organization's capacity for internal change that is rooted in knowledge of external conditions. Adaptable organizations are in tune to the customer and the marketplace and are able to capitalize on this knowledge. High-performing organizational cultures also encourage and support employee involvement. They develop and invest in their employees and promote empowerment as well as teamwork. Finally, high-performing organizations are well integrated around strong values that enable them to maintain consistency in their operations. Consistency takes a look at the values, systems, and processes that serve as a powerful source of stability and internal integration. Each of these elements of organizational culture play a key role in driving innovation in organizations. More specifically, the values manifested within the adaptability trait of the culture model are often mentioned as important drivers of innovation. This is because having a strong customer focus and market orientation spurs proactive responses to customer interests and provides a source of ideas for successful innovation. Adaptable organizations are also value educated risk-taking and learning, which enables them to recognize valuable information, integrate it into the internal knowledge base, and translate it into commercial ends. They are not stuck in their ways and are informed in their pursuits. Despite the clear and logical link between adaptability and innovation, you cannot discount the impact of strength and mission on innovation. It has been suggested that innovation largely occurs because there is a vision of innovation that exists within upper management and is disseminated to employees. In the case of Apple, makes this point extraordinarily well. Having a clear vision allows for the development of new ideas that are aligned with the direction in which the organization is moving, and organizations with long-term rather than short-term objectives are more likely to be innovative. So, aside from being flexible and customer-focused, it seems that to be innovative, organizations should also have a strong vision, goals, and direction. Involvement is most strongly linked to creativity, which is an important component of innovation. Organizations with highly involved employees create a sense of freedom and autonomy that is important for idea generation, and employees feel capable to develop and pursue their new ideas. These organizations are also built around teams which promote ideas and open information flow. Finally, without consistent and integrated systems and processes, it's difficult to move any innovation forward. Coordination is needed for the adoption of initiatives, and interdepartmental consensus enhances innovation. In general, the consistency piece is likely a very important supporting piece of the puzzle. So after having a strong mission, the capacity to create change, involved and empowered people, and market-focused ideas that allow organizations to stay ahead of the curve, consistency is required for organizations to effectively execute. So in sum, it's likely that all of these aspects of organizational culture play a role in innovation. In our own research on the link between culture and innovation, we find support for this notion. More specifically, innovation can be a difficult thing to measure and quantify in organizations. So in our own research in this area, we focused on 3 different indicators of innovation. One was a 5-item survey that assessed the role that innovation plays in organizations. In another measure, we asked employees to rate their organization's performance in terms of new product development. And in a third indicator of innovation, we quantified an organization's growth potential, or the market's expectations that an organization will continue to grow in the future. Looking at the culture profiles of those highly innovative organizations and contrasting them with those with lower innovation scores, what we generally find is that organizations with stronger cultures across the board are more innovative. In other words, all aspects of culture likely play a role, and those organizations that are able to balance and have strength in all areas are those that are more innovative. But by digging a bit deeper, a very consistent pattern also emerges. More specifically, across all 3 measures of innovation in 3 different samples, we found that while all 4 aspects of culture predict and are important to innovation in organizations, the adaptability and mission areas generally come out on top. And in addition to being the most important predictors of innovation, organizations with relative strengths in either of these areas of culture out-innovate those with relative strengths in either involvement or consistency. Thus, it seems likely that these externally oriented aspects of organizational culture play a key role in driving innovation in organizations. But while adaptability and mission may have a strong impact, it is important to remember that we generally find that all aspects of culture play a role, and that those most innovative companies have strengths in all areas. So what does this mean for fostering innovation in your organization? Does this mean that to be innovative you just need to improve in adaptability and mission? Or does this mean that you need to improve your culture across the board? Well, not necessarily. We believe that there's different approaches to innovation that we'll talk in more detail about in the next phase of the webinar. But before we get into that, I'd like to pause and see if there are any specific questions on the research. Yep.
Okay, let me look at it. So there was a question from Christopher Drake again regarding mission, adaptability, involvement. All companies strive to build that, but what makes a real difference? What Apple specifically implemented which makes of real differences?
Well, Lindsey just reviewed our research and what points towards the adaptability and mission pieces, and we talked a lot about those in the first part of this webinar. And we believe that really clear mission and that just intense focus on the products. And it wasn't just, hey, we've got a product focus, mission or vision that's on the wall. There were very clear characteristics, and there are very clear characteristics about how they design things and their approach. And obviously there are a lot of systems and approaches and things within Apple that we're not reviewing that really bring that to life on a day-to-day basis. And we looked at various stories that give us insight to that, and we don't know all the details. But from a research perspective, really pointing towards the adaptability and mission, And then we covered in the first part that incredible product focus that really allowed the adaptability to take place with incredible speed, even though it wasn't founded in customer focus directly and getting feedback there. And we'll talk about the different perspectives and different approaches next.
Okay. Question from Shannon. She really liked what Lindsey just shared about our research, but she was wondering if we could share the script or replay option for that, what she just shared. So this webinar will be available online afterwards, but also we are preparing a white paper on innovation, which will be available online, so you can also look at that as a resource.
And we'll talk at the end. You'll also be able to receive a copy of these slides.
Okay. Thank you. So as I discussed, we believe that innovation isn't a one-type-fits-all approach, and that organizations can be equally successful adopting different approaches with different cultural emphases. To elaborate, we will discuss 3 different models of culture-driven innovation. While interrelated, each of these approaches has one primary emphasis. Depending on your organizational situation, your strengths and weaknesses, and your business model, you may find that one of these approaches clearly resonates with you, others don't seem as applicable. One approach is to drive innovation primarily through a clear and compelling vision. This is a very top-down approach to innovation, where vision, goals, and direction strongly drive everything that happens in the organization. Innovation becomes the nucleus of the organization and is really a means to satisfy the vision. Customer-driven innovation is slightly different in that innovation is primarily driven by the external market and satisfying the needs and wants of the customer. In this case, innovation is a reaction to the demands of the marketplace. Involvement-driven innovation is a very bottom-up process and is driven by creativity. In this model, innovation primarily occurs as a result of allowing employees the freedom and means to be creative and to explore ideas.
Okay, now we're going to have a poll. And really want all of your input on this, and we'll leave it open for just about a minute, so you'll need to respond pretty quickly. When you think about your organization going forward, which iCulture will work for your organization? And what do you think is the culture you're either trying to develop or expand, or you feel you want to create for the future? And I'm going to turn it over to Rossi, who's going to activate the webinar, and please respond. We've got a few options for you to select from that tie into what Lindsey just reviewed. Okay, we're going to show the results here. One second, please. Okay. You know, we received some feedback, of course, on all 3 fronts, with customer-driven being a key area, but also vision-driven and involvement-driven being, you know, a lot of interest out there. So we'll spend some time on all 3 pieces, but we'll spend a little more on the customer-driven piece, and that's kind of interesting, considering that from an Apple perspective, their customer approach is, their innovation approach is clearly not a customer-driven framework.
So yeah, thank you very much for that feedback. And as Tim mentioned, in the coming slides, we'll talk a little bit more about each of these 3 differing approaches to innovation. We'll also give examples of organizations that primarily follow each of these approaches. In terms of vision-driven, there are few clearer examples of vision-driven innovation than the organization that has been the focus of this webinar, Apple. As you heard during Tim's presentation, other aspects of culture absolutely come into play into Apple's story, but Apple is not known for its bottom-up processes, nor for its focus groups. Apple's innovation has been driven from the top down by a clear and compelling vision that has aligned employees and shaped everything that they do. As far as customer-driven innovation, P&G is a great example. P&G was the first company to conduct deliberate, data-based market research with consumers in 1924, and with $350 million a year spent on consumer understanding, this is a practice that is still important to P&G today, and is something that has served them well in the area of innovation. Bruce Brown, Chief Technology Officer at P&G, has a short video discussing how innovation is the core of what P&G does, and in it he states, "Innovation starts with the consumer. We listen to our consumers to gain insights into how we can innovate in the way that everyday life is lived. We use this knowledge to generate innovations." This insightful video into P&G's customer-driven innovation strategy is available on their homepage.
So, I mean, think about this from Jobs' perspective. You know, he might think this is a $350 million cost save. You know, why do all these focus groups? Why do all that work? You know, that's not necessary. So, you know, it's a very different approach and a very different perspective.
The key to customer-driven innovation is to listen to the marketplace and your customers and to translate that knowledge and information into new and improved products, services, and processes. And P&G does this extremely well. And still a different model than either Apple or P&G, but also very successful, Google is a perfect example of an organization with an involvement-driven approach to innovation. Many people are familiar with their infamous rule, which allows and encourages employees to spend work time thinking about pursuits and ideas that are outside their core job. At Google, it's all about encouraging creativity and the next great idea. This is a very bottom-up approach to innovation. Google's executive chairman has been quoted saying, "We don't have a 2-year plan. We have a next week plan and a next quarter plan. Most of our successful products were built by small teams reacting quickly." So again, a very different approach than Apple's top-down vision-driven approach, and a very different approach than P&G's customer market-oriented approach. Involvement-driven approaches focus on using teams to boost creativity, empowering employees to be creative, and giving them the capabilities to develop their ideas. This is absolutely something Google is known for. While vision was a key component for Apple, the customer for P&G, and the employees for Google, you'll see balance in other components of culture in each of these organizations' innovation stories. For example, P&G's CEO from 2000 to 2010, A.G. Lafley, co-authored a book titled The Game Changer, How You Can Drive Revenue and Profit Growth with Innovation. And in this book, he definitely talks about and highlights P&G's laser-sharp focus on the consumer, but he also talks about disciplined and repeatable internal innovation processes and the human factors that drive innovation, such as teamwork. So really highlighting the consistency and involvement components that were important to P&G's innovation strategy as well. Google's founder has also been known to have spent some time with Steve Jobs, and it's said that Jobs encouraged Google to have more focus, which is not surprising given that Apple innovation strategy is a very vision-driven, top-down innovation strategy, and Google's was quite the opposite. And in the recent Apple news, you'll hear a lot about what Tim Cook is doing to foster more involvement in Apple. So similar to what we found in our own research linking culture to innovation, all aspects of culture likely play a role and are important to innovation. Through these examples, we haven't spent much time talking about consistency, but consistency is present in every innovation story, and without consistency, it is near impossible to implement and sustain innovation. It plays a key supporting role in the innovation process, from Jobs' daily lunches with the head of product development, which is quite a consistent and committed action, to P&G's reliable and scalable internal processes. Consistency is about the integrated systems that are needed to move innovations forward. So, depending on the challenges and structure of your organization, it may make more sense to focus your innovation strategy on the vision, the market, or the people. But whatever your primary strategy, remember that all these components should be present to drive and maintain innovation.
All right, thank you, Lindsey. So we've covered the three main pieces. Hopefully you have a little bit of a picture about Apple with some structure around it from 4 different dimensions that make up the Denison model. And you can see from the research how there is some alignment there about how the strong mission and adaptability that's present in Apple is no surprise. And also that they have the consistency that really brings that to life every day. But they also have, some involvement. And the team approach and the things like Apple University and the Top 100, and I'm sure, numerous other systems and processes, different from P&G, but I'm sure there's some that may be quite similar to really integrate that across 63,000 people. So we'll take some more questions.
So here's an interesting question from Linda Ellerwar. I hope that I pronounced the name correctly. So can an organization move from vision to customer to involvement-driven approaches depending on the phase, status, and need of your organization? For instance, startup versus well-established organization.
Sure. I mean, my first impression to answering that is that it doesn't matter what the stage is of your life cycle, that's the connection you're trying to make, and that you can be very, very vision-driven. And we talk about there's sometimes being a dynamic tension almost between mission and involvement, where mission being a little more top-down, involvement being a little more bottom-up, and how do you get the right balance that's right for your organization and where you're at in your life cycle, where maybe you're at a startup point with a very clear vision, a very strong head who can drive a lot of things from the top. But as the organization grows, involvement becomes more of a key.
Okay. I hope that answered Linda's question. Another question from Stephanie Henderson. Would the type of innovation that is most important for an organization in part be linked to the product or service that is being offered?
Well, I'm sure you could make that connection, and it's probably the case in many, many places. But we've got a couple examples here that are interesting contrasts where P&G is a consumer products company from one perspective, and Apple's also a consumer products company from another perspective, and yet they're being driven from kind of different places. And then we also have Apple and Google, who in many ways are competitors also, and yet they're the inspiration, I guess, for their innovation is still coming from different places. So, I think it's a mix of the organization, the products, but also the leadership that's involved, because the leadership is going to drive the culture. And in this case, it's very clear what Steve Jobs' approach was when it comes to the three.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Just to follow up on that, I would agree wholeheartedly with Tim's last statement there, that I think that definitely that the type of product is going to play a role. The type of product or service is going to play a role, but really the leadership and the type of culture that you have is really what's important to think about. So when you think about your organization and the type of leadership that exists in your organization, as well as the strengths and challenges that you face within your internal culture, any of these approaches can be successful, but it's about capitalizing on your strengths and minimizing your weaknesses. And so really each of these approaches can work depending on the current culture that you have right now and capitalizing on what those strengths within your culture is. If you have a strong leadership and a strong mission and a strong vision, then taking a mission-oriented approach to innovation could make sense regardless of your product or service offering. And so just kind of as one example.
Okay, well, we've got lots of other questions, and we're going to respond to those after the webinar, but we want to cover a few more slides for those of you that are still interested in hanging on to hear a little bit about Denison. Again, thank you all for participating. We've got a few more slides to go, so hopefully you can hang on for those. But we do want to thank not just the participants that are on the line here, but I also want to thank our webinar team, especially Ia, who created these incredible slides, Lindsey, the rest of our webinar team that's here, Brendan, Rossi. The recorded webinar broadcast will be available on our site. We're going to follow up and forward you a copy of this presentation with also some Q&A summaries. And if you would like any personal Denison follow-up or would like to schedule a presentation, please check the follow-up requested box in the webinar evaluation email you'll get following this broadcast. We've just got a couple slides if you hang on for some more info on Denison. Denison works with a wide variety of customers in different geographies, different markets, a number of different industries. And again, we talked before about how our focus is all about on the link to performance, and hopefully this webinar was a good example of how looking at things from a research perspective and combining that with an understanding of what's going on in an organization can be very valuable. And we focused on the top part of the model, driving innovation. But when we look at our overall research, we look at other areas like creativity, quality, employee satisfaction, profitability, and that's where our base research was founded, was more from a financial standpoint, but our research over the years has grown. There's a lot of info on this slide, but hopefully it gives you a feel from a visual standpoint how we went through this column here on innovation to try and bring some structure and organization to the entire conversation about an innovation culture and how that, can be driven in different ways. But if you want to start in one place, it may be good to look at the top half of the model and what you're doing to be clear and aligned as an organization from that standpoint. But one thing, the key, of course, is the balance across the other parts of the model. So, we look at other areas, whether it be something like sales growth, market share, customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction, to give you a feel for maybe where we need to start the discussion to make sure there's some strength, but then to go about improvement with a connection to the other parts of the model. So it's not a focus on one little piece of the pie. It's how it all fits together and where you start that may help. And that's where the research can help organizations. If you want to hear more about Denison and the work we do, we have our schedule of educational events for this year. We do e-workshops that are online sessions. There are 4 short sessions. Typically, I deliver 2 of those. Brian Atkins, our CEO, delivers 1 of them. And in many cases, Dan Denison, the founder of Denison, delivers 1 of those sessions. So you can register online for those. We also have a schedule of in-person workshops, again involving Brian Atkins, our CEO, myself, and often Dan Denison leads the Ann Arbor session. So please sign up for those if you're interested in really getting immersed in some information on culture that goes well beyond innovation and how that might impact your performance or be useful. And finally, if you have any questions you'd like answered after this webinar, please send your emails to denisonnews@denisonculture.com. We have a tremendous amount of additional information on our website at denisonculture.com in our resources area when it comes to case studies, webinar recordings like this one and other webinars that we've conducted, research notes, white papers, and other information. Please follow us, whether it's Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, or info we have on SlideShare. And really important, we'd really like you to respond to the follow-up information to give us some feedback on this overall session. We know we weren't able to answer all of your questions, and we'll do our best to follow up on as many of those and follow up to this webinar. And we, as an organization, are working to be much more customer-driven. We're probably more of a mission-driven organization with our focus on culture and leadership and how we do it. But we need to be more customer-driven in many ways, so we need your feedback. So please give us that, and thank you for participating.
The organizer has